Now it's my pleasure to move on to our final speaker of this session, Pedr Howard, the SVP of Creative Excellence at Ipsos. Pedr has spent his career spanning all aspects of advertising research. He currently leads strategy and creative development at Ipsos in the US, working on matching the Ipsos offer and narrative for achieving creative excellence with the ever-changing needs of clients. He's passionate about advertising creativity and bringing consumer research and data into the communication development process. And today he's going to share with us a preview of Ipsos's evidence-based look at current trends for more successful and less successful creative executions. A set of learnings on what levers are available to create more effective advertising and what trade-offs happen when you pursue certain tactics. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Pedr Howard.
Hi, thanks very much. As we said, my name is Pedr Howard. I'm with Ipsos, one of the biggest research companies in the world, but specifically working within the Creative Excellence division, where we cover any research to do with anything to do with advertising or communications, from early insight generation through the development of ideas, the assessment of creative, and then seeing how that works in market. What I'm here to talk to you about today is a recent project we've been undertaking, which we're calling Pearls, the principles of effective advertising based on research learnings. So, how did Ipsos put this evidence communications together? We started with a meta-analysis of just over 2,000 video ads, looking at the creative variables that went into them. So looking at the levers that creative agencies and teams can use in terms of putting together those commercials in the first place. After extensive coding of that, we've cross-referenced that with outputs that we see within our communication testing database. So are the ads being successful on certain different KPIs? And what are the end results coming for the brands? We've integrated that with our brand health tracking database. So we have even more levels of data to look at. So we can look at category and brand dynamics for this. So we can see, is there a difference in what works for the brands that are leading versus the challenger brands? Is there a difference in a crowded category versus, maybe you're the brand, you're the leader, or there's just two main players? So what differences are there with those dynamics? And then finally, the project was really an undertaking of data science and analytics to piece all of this together and to try and uncover patterns and effects to present marketers and agencies with this clear evidence-based view on the performance of the different creative strategies. And it's important to talk about this in terms of it is the evidence-based element of the way that we look at creative. So I think we just heard from Tia, sometimes it's not great to ask people what works or what they like, ask consumers what they say they want to see or hear in a commercial. The way that we look at our advertising is very much on an evidence-based observation approach. So some of the key metrics that we'll talk about today, visibility. It's very simple. We expose the ad in a clutter reel to consumers in a distracted exposure, and then we see if people can remember the ad or not, and we see how many people can remember the specific ad we're talking about. Brand link, very important. And again, of those people who can remember the ad, can they spontaneously link this to the brand in question or not? Are you effectively being remembered for your brand or just the generic commercial itself? And then finally, when we think about the impact that advertising can have, we think about this in terms of behavior change and brand relationship. Behavior change is about short-term effects, typically in terms of purchase intention, frequency, can be in terms of choice or consideration, depending on the category. But the idea is this likely to have a short-term effect in the way that people interact with your brand? Brand relationship is more long-term. So this is more about your equity measures. So here we're looking to see if there's an impact on that emotional or functional associations with the brand. Both of these behavior change and brand relationship are done in a very clean way from an exposed to unexposed. So again, we're not asking people if this did anything. We're just comparing the opinions of people who saw the ad and didn't see the ad and deriving that difference. Now, one thing I will warn you, these are absolutely not commandments to live by. If there's one thing we've learned about creative over the years, it's that some of the great ads break the rules. You don't have to do everything that's in this absolutely. That's not the point. The point is to say, look, there are certain things that traditionally set you up for success, and there are certain things that maybe make that success more difficult. And it doesn't mean you can't do it, but just be aware of what you're doing before you go down that path. So for example, I'll start with something about visibility. So very simple, is your ad likely to be remembered or not? We know that attention is extremely hard. We're living in a cluttered environment. Everyone's distracted. Grabbing attention in the first place, it's kind of like table stakes for your ad to do anything. So the average ad kind of obviously has a 33% chance of falling in the top third of the database. So 33% chance of being a good performing ad on that visibility metric. What we've discovered are two archetypes of ads. So archetype A, if you follow this kind of role, this kind of method of putting the ad together, you got a 50% chance of scoring in that top third. So much higher chance of succeeding. Meanwhile, if you follow archetype B, another common form of ad that we see, both within the ads that we see at Ipsos and just within the wider market, you're down to an 8% chance of success. So the difference between those two is archetype A is 6 times more likely to be well remembered than archetype B. Archetype A are ads that include drama, humor, and conversation, some combination of these metrics. Archetype B is a high scene count with a continuous voiceover. So a huge difference in how these ads perform in real recall of whether people can remember the ad or not. So let's think about archetype A. I mean, simply it's tell a story. We know that the psychological reasons that humans remember stories. Stories are a way of getting people to listen and understand certain things. Metaphors, originated as one of the original forms of telling stories. So it's not that surprising to see that this works, but it's probably reassuring to some of you who are making these ads to know that if you can tell a real story to people, you're going to get higher breakthrough scores and you're going to succeed and be recognized in market. And what's interesting with this analysis is it's not just as simple as doing something that we would consider drama, which is kind of a linear single scene or story there, having conversation between characters or humor, because individually they don't have that much effect. Each of these things is still getting you in that 30% chance. What matters, and what we've done with this kind of additional layer of analysis, is look at the pairings. And to get that archetype of stories, what you see is when you start to combine drama, humor, and conversation, either two of those or all three, that's when you start to see this high boost in the amount of the chance it has that the ad is going to be remembered by the people who are exposed to it. When we think about archetype B, we're thinking about that high scene count with a voiceover. So again, the average ad, 33% chance of scoring in that top third for visibility. The continuous voiceover ads are down to 21%. The high scene count, so those fast cuts, very quickly changing between different things that are on screen, gets you down to 14%. And then when you combine both of those things together, that's when you fall into that bottom 8%. The high scene count, we've definitely seen that with a variety of eye tracking and neuroscience, that the higher number of scenes definitely leads to confusion. The reality is that viewers don't want to work hard to uncode the advertising. If you throw lots of scenes at them, they're often still trying to process the one before when the new one comes up, and it's difficult to get there. But again, this isn't to say that this doesn't succeed. I'm sure some of you right now are thinking of examples of an ad that was a high scene count with a voiceover that was a great ad and everyone remembered. And that's true because 8% of these ads do succeed in terms of getting high breakthrough. It's just to be aware that you are bringing in elements that can cause confusion and can stop people from processing the ad. So you've got to think about other ways to compensate for that if that's the path you want to go down. It's actually funny that the last talk mentioned exactly this. But if you think about the COVID-19 sea of sameness that we've just seen, where everyone was producing similar ads based on similar insights, there were a lot of restrictions in what footage could or couldn't be shot. It was stock footage. It was what do we got? How can we repurpose previous footage? Fully understand the path that we had to go down to make these ads in days. But what ended up was a lot of vignette ads with a lot of fast-moving scene cuts with a voiceover narrating the new story that's coming along in the supers. And so this evidence-based learning that we've seen from our database prior to COVID played out in front of us with 65% of people having seen coronavirus-related advertising, but less than 20% could connect it to any specific company or brand. So that takes us on to brand linkage, linking it to the brand. thinking about that as the next hurdle that you have to get through. So once people have remembered your ad, can you make sure that they remember your brand? So one of the clearest things that we've seen within our database learning is to use distinctive assets and not to just use brand logos or mentions. So looking at the difference between those who are high performers and low performers on brand link, there's no difference in the amount of times that any of those ads mention visually, mention audibly, or show visually the brand logo or the product. No difference at all. What we do see a big difference in is the use of distinctive assets. And by distinctive assets, we mean that can be anything that's not the brand logo that is associated to your brand. So it could be colors work very well for certain brands. It can be a distinctive creative style where you're following the story or the progression of different characters. It can be the character themselves. In some cases, it can be celebrities. There's many different forms of distinctive assets, and there's actually ways that you can uncover if you do have distinctive assets or not, how well they're associated with your brand, and then start to maybe establish some if you don't have them. But that's really the key to brand link, is distinctive brand assets. We've got a detailed paper about this called The Power of You, which we'll link in the follow-up to this this session. I think there's some stuff going out tomorrow. We'll make sure that that's available for anyone who wants to look into this distinctive assets in more detail. But again, brand assets, it's things like this. Great piece of creativity. You immediately know what this is for. The red and the yellow tell you it's McDonald's. The Wi-Fi thing looks like the golden arches. You immediately know what's going on here without having to mention the brand. And that's the power of brand assets, is that you're free to be more creative without having to shoehorn the brand in and kind of artificially, put the logo over here, bring it in and add it in when it's not necessary. Distinctive assets also enable creativity. They can force you to think about this in new ways. It can kind of give you a roadmap towards how can we tell a new and different story using some of that similar thing that we've seen in the past. It's something that we sometimes think about in terms of fluency of assets, but disfluency in terms of showing that asset in a slightly different format. And again, we've got some great thought pieces on that, which I can link you to after the session. Progressive have done a great example of this, where they started off in the insurance store with Flo just being a salesperson who would help people navigate the insurance choices. But it's then evolved with Flo leaving the store and going out into exploring the world. And now they're bringing in other characters. Jamie's starting to feature in a number of ads. And they're really building that story and that distinctive creative style, which is allowing them that freedom to be creative, but still make sure that Progressive gets the credit. One of the things that doesn't work, I said earlier that there's no difference when you do just by putting the brand on screen. Adding a watermark, so the little logo in the bottom right here, and I mean nothing against these two brands, it's just two that I picked very quickly to demonstrate what this means. It's often a band-aid that's thrown onto an ad that might not be doing as well as we hope it is. It doesn't really help much at all. What we've actually seen is that it only helps ads that aren't very engaging. So if your ad is really engaging, you're telling a great story, you're getting breakthrough, people aren't even going to look at the logo in the side because they're not going to be distracted from the action. They're too busy following the great story and the narrative that we're creating to look at what's in the corner. Whereas maybe if your ad's less engaging and they're a bit bored with what's on the screen, that's when they're more likely to kind of look around and they might catch the logo in the corner and remember it. But definitely this is, this compared to integrating a distinctive asset into your ad is night and day in terms of the performance for brand linkage. And then finally, just to think about these longer term effects or short term effects, behavior change, what works and what doesn't work here. So one of the things that we've seen from this is to think long term, particularly with video assets such as these, even if your objective is short term sales. So this chart is showing how effective the ads are in delivering on that short term, potentially sales metric or some term of immediate behavior change. And when we've coded the ads in terms of, is this a short-term sales activation ad? Is it a long-term brand play? Or is it a combination? The worst performing ads on that sales metric are the ones that are short-term focused in terms of sales activation, line extensions, very heavily focusing on the individual product and the reasons to buy that specific line. So even if that's your goal, the idea would be to always integrate both and do both. Always think about the brand as well as just the product itself. The other thing to think about in terms of response is to have realistic expectations for digital videos. So one of the things that we see a huge difference in digital videos is their ability to leave a branded impression. So do people remember the ad? Can they name the brand? Do they remember seeing an ad from you? So there's 4 times more likely to leave a branded impression, the best ads versus the weakest ads in terms of these digital videos. Thinking about that in another way, you can get the same number of branded impressions with 1/4 of the views if you're airing strong creative that you know is leaving branded impressions. Branded impressions are huge. They drive awareness, they drive saliency, they can seed campaigns, they can link to other materials that you're doing. There's a whole range of things that you can expect these to do. What we don't see happening from digital videos is driving that short-term sales impact itself. Only 5% of the digital videos that we've seen are actually driving that short-term sales impact. So again, 5% of the ads are being successful at this. It's possible, it's not impossible. But the realistic expectation for a digital video is drive those branded impressions, drive that awareness and that saliency. Make sure that you're delivering something, even if people are going to skip or scroll away from the ad. You've still got an opportunity to build that awareness and saliency. So finally, I'll close. We've done a lot of research recently during COVID. We've looked at that sea of sameness. This is the ad that of all the ones that we've done research on, that performed the best on all of the metrics, the highest breakthrough, the highest brand link, most likely to have some kind of impact on the consumers.
Hello. Yo, what's up? Nothing, B. In quarantine, having a bud. What's up with you?
None. Quarantining, having a bud.
True.
What's up? Yo, who's that?
Yo, you pick up the phone. Hello?
What's that?
Yo, where's Dookie?
Yo, Duke. Yo.
What's that?
What's that?
So you okay, B?
I'm good, B. Quarantining, having a bud. Thanks for checking in.
So to wrap up, a good example there of an ad that didn't follow the mold of, the more somber, serious nature of the quarantining. They took a more lighthearted take on it. They told a story with characters, their distinctive creative style. They brought back a successful ad and updated it for the current situation. It was very successful in driving short-term impact, even though it didn't really say anything about what Budweiser was or product attributes or any of that. So a good example of the pearls of wisdom that we've seen here, telling stories, using distinctive assets, thinking long-term, even if you're trying to drive short-term activation, and be realistic with your digital video and the expectations for it. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pedr. That was really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that research. I'm glad that it supports the idea of storytelling versus kind of frantic flash cuts. It's always good when the research supports what we would all like to be working on anyway. So thank you for sharing that. I look forward to seeing that research that you were mentioning.